So the letter that Charlie Kirk wrote to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu establishes very clearly, without a shadow of a doubt, what Charlie's view on Israel was, what he believed about Israel. Now, the second question, the follow-up question, and this is an equally important question, is was Charlie Kirk's view on Israel changing, or had it radically changed from the beginning of May when he sent that letter to Benjamin Netanyahu up until the middle of September, shortly before his assassination, as Candace Owens claims? Well, to establish the answer to this question, let's pause for a moment on August 6th. On August 6th, 2025, Charlie Kirk appeared on Megyn Kelly's show. And as Megyn Kelly tells this story, she had not planned to talk about Israel with Charlie when he came on the show. She did this. She hadn't discussed it with her producers. She hadn't even given him a heads up that this is a topic she wanted to discuss. She just felt in the moment that she wanted to talk about it with Charlie because he was a friend, and she brought it up, as sometimes happens on shows. And this was Megyn Kelly talking to Charlie Kirk about criticizing Israel and supporting Israel. Take a look at this interaction.
You and I are both supporters of Israel and have defended Israel since the beginning of this conflict and spoken out about the anti-Semitism that has erupted on these college campuses many times. And something's happening, though, with this whole debate that is really bothering me, and I wonder if you're feeling it too. So, I mean, I genuinely believe you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody in the public eye who's been as outspoken a defender of not every move Israel's taken in the war, but of Israel's right to defend itself and of the just backward awfulness that we've been seeing on college campuses and the backlash against American Jews than yours truly. I mean, I have been at the pointy end of the spear on this, and I
completely agree with that.
And it was all heartfelt, and it remains heartfelt.
Yes.
However, my contention here is that some in the pro-Israel camp are so knee-jerk about calling you anti-Semitic or getting deeply offended if you say anything that doesn't align with their narrative, that it undermines their own cause. And I have to tell you, I find it very irritating because I do feel like some of us have earned the right to have some credibility on the subject of Israel and don't want to be called those names when we have some mild pushback on some of the overreaches, whether it's, whether they're winning or losing the propaganda war right now. And my contention is they've begun to lose it. And I realize it's propaganda coming at us from Hamas, but their numbers have turned here in America. They've turned, not so much with Republicans, a little bit with Republicans, but completely with the Democrat Party and with independents. They have shifted mightily from at least double digits highs to single digit lows now with when it comes to approval. And also with respect to, you and I speculated about this at the Turning Point event, whether the possibility of Jeffrey Epstein possibly being a Mossad agent or asset or affiliated with, that's been turned around on me too, to you must be anti-Semitic. What the hell? That's such bullshit. The same people who say you can criticize Israel, that's fine, we won't call you anti-Semitic if you criticize Israel, now turn around immediately and say you're anti-Semitic for even raising that. I completely reject that. And I raise this as a pushback against my friends on that particular strain of the aisle to watch it, because you don't want to alienate people who are openly your friends by going nuts in your crackdowns on mild pushback on anything related to Israel. Now you take it.
I'm so glad you brought this up, and I would second that, Megyn. I think I have a bulletproof resume showing my defense of Israel, both on campus, on social media, to great, let's just say mockery and scorn at times, because I believe it. Right? I believe in the scriptural land rights given to Israel. I believe in fulfillment of prophecy. And again, I'm not a theologian, but I'm a Christian. My life was changed in Israel. The spiritual energy is so amazing there. I want them to win. I've said that repeatedly.
Same.
And However, Megyn, you're hitting on something very potent and important. Now, let me first say, I don't want to judge an entire group because there's been many people in the pro-Israel world that have been very sweet, very kind, very nuanced, very Charlie, you're with us. You don't have to agree all the time. However, and I will say this, the behavior by a lot, both privately and publicly, are pushing people like you and me away. Not like we're going to be pro-Hamas, not like we're going to, but we're like, honestly, the way you are treating me is so repulsive. I have text messages, Megyn, calling me an anti-Semite. I am learning biblical Hebrew and writing a book on the Shabbat. I honor the Shabbat, literally the Jewish Sabbath. I visit Israel and fight for it. And there's another article out in the Times of Israel today. I could read it on air. I was just reading before I got on. Charlie, what are you doing? Like, what am I doing? I'm sorry. Like, let's just take a step back here. Like, I'm an American citizen. Yes, I want Israel to win. Yes, I'm a Christian. But like some of the mess, and you've seen how I've been treated, Megyn, by some, not all, by some.
No, it's very irritating.
It's
been
almost
so
as if
unfair. They were coming after you after Turning Point for, among other things, that you had Dave Smith there. Dave Smith is allowed to criticize Israel. You had both sides. The Israeli side was overrepresented.
Though. No, you're not allowed to. It's even worse than that. Again, I just want to repeat for the fifth time. I love Israel. I want Israel to win. But my moral character is now being put into question, Megyn. Not my decisions. Not like, hey, are you doing this? Is it smart or is it dumb? But no, I am a bad person if I do this. And I could go, you saw it, Megyn. It was trending on Twitter, thousands of tweets and text messages. And if I were to be charitable and generous, I will say the people that are attacking me are in a hyper paranoid state because they're at war, and war tends to make things black and white, and you're a hammer looking for a nail. So I'm trying to be charitable, Megyn. Literally, I'm trying to cut as much slack as I can, right? Like, okay, what would it be like if all of a sudden I'm starting to see a pattern of behavior similar to what my grandparents saw in 1930s Germany online? How would I behave? So that's like my charitable kind of overcompensation spirit. At the same time, I'm like, but it's not defensible to be dumb, right?
Yeah.
So,
and it's offensive. It's offensive to those of us who have been out there defending them in many instances against critics on our own side. And now you have a couple of comments like, well, what about this? Well, has it gone on too long? Like, is it time to wrap it up? And the thing about Epstein is just so bizarre. I don't know who he was an agent for. It might have been Israel or an asset, or it might have been nobody. Yeah. But we're allowed to speculate about that. It's there's some rule. You can't go there when it comes to Israel.
Well, you and I believe that we're Americans and Americans first, period. End of story. We are citizens of this nation, okay?
That's right.
Israel, we have funded, we have supported, and they're up against a sea of Islamic totalitarianism, and we should be cheering for them, right? Because they're up against barbarians and monsters, and we want them to win. However, here is Megyn Kelly and Charlie Kirk combined, probably 30 million social media followers, like pretty, right? And you and I have been holding this down, and you probably get the negative, oh, you're just shilling for Israel, whatever. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do what's right regardless of the feedback, right? But then all of a sudden, like, I host a person that I moderate the debate of, mind you, right? And I give equal time to Josh Hammer, equal time to a pro-Israel advocate, and my moral character is being put into question. And so I think it's a hyper paranoid, like, we're just going to try to, we're going to just stamp out everything type of practice. But it goes to the point where, if, for example, if I have less ability sometimes online to criticize the Israeli government without backlash than actual Israelis do. And that's really, really weird, isn't it, Megyn? That's not so right.
Wrong-headed. I'll tell you.
Okay. So there's so much to break down in that video, because one of the comments that Charlie made in that video is what is being cherry-picked as so-called substantiation that his views on Israel were changing. When he basically said, when I make any comment about Israel's war strategy or have Dave Smith engage in a debate at a Turning Point event, and I'm accused on the basis of those things despite my track record of being anti-Semitic, he said, you're starting to lose. And then he cut himself off and he said, not my support. I'm not going to turn pro-Hamas. But he said later on in the clip that he feels deflated by that. Megyn Kelly, by the way, described exactly the same scenario. She said after she went on with Piers Morgan and said, listen, I support Israel, but it's time to wrap up this war. We don't want it to be a forever war that's subsidized by American taxpayers. She said that this is what happened to her. Take a listen.
And as Trump said a year ago, time to wrap it up. Cue
Well said.
the 25 text messages from people I know, like friends who are pro-Israel, like, I'm so sad that you've left us. I'm so sad let's debate it. You know, many Jewish advocates saying, let me come on your show and we'll debate. There's nothing to debate. I'm on Israel's side. Just stop. Me observing
I totally agree.
that you're losing the propaganda war and that this has gone on for about 2 years now. And look, I mean, I pulled the stats, support for Israel's.
Okay. So having listened to their exact words, and I played you the full context of that clip because I don't want any selective editing. I don't want any cherry picking. I want everyone here to have heard. I mean, you've been here with me for the last almost hour now. I want you to have heard everyone say the words themselves, read the full context of any letter that's been written. Those who are right now characterizing what Charlie described, which is his experience, those who are characterizing Charlie's experience with being the recipient of false accusations of anti-Semitism because he hosted Dave Smith or Tucker Carlson at his conferences, or because Megyn Kelly wants the war to wrap up. Those who are characterizing Charlie's experience as somehow evidence that he was becoming anti-Israel are actually missing the point. Maybe it's worse than that. Maybe they're deliberately misrepresenting what many of us on the right, including me, have experienced this year. Because what Megyn Kelly described and what Charlie Kirk described, that same thing has happened to me. Over the course of this year, it's very unique, actually, to this year. It's never happened before. Just this year, I've received, I can't even tell you how many, 6 urgent invites to visit Israel. Invites not just from pro-Israel groups, but from the Israeli government itself. Urgent invites, like it's necessary that you come here right now. I received an invite to visit Israel from the Israeli government that turned out to be just days before the war began. And I said, no, I didn't go to Israel. I don't take money from foreign governments. And that includes accepting, free trips. But I was so turned off by this because I thought, well, if this invite came from the Israeli government obviously knew that the war was going to start before it started. Therefore, they knew that had I accepted the trip and been in Israel, that I would be there during the war, which would have been dangerous for me and for my family. And I thought, who would do that? Why would they invite me to be there during a war without telling me that a war was going to happen, placing me in danger without any advanced knowledge? And I was very off-put by that. I was very turned off by that. I didn't like that at all. And by the way, I experienced exactly the same, literally the exact same situation that Megyn Kelly described. Privately, I got text message after text messages. I actually can't tell you how many times we've gone off air here and my phone, which sits next to me, has been blowing up during an episode because I talked about Jeffrey Epstein and explored the question, was Jeffrey Epstein ever doing work with or for the Israeli intelligence apparatus? Accusations of, I think the quote was, rabid anti-Semitism, and not just from one person. Like, many texts. And these are false accusations. If you criticize the Israeli government for anything or ask questions, because the Israeli government, as Charlie Kirk pointed out in his letter to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli government isn't very upfront with information. It's hard to actually, know anything about what's going on. So because of that, there are even more questions that we should pose to the Israeli government. And like Megyn Kelly, I outright reject, I think it's a ludicrous idea, that it's okay. I can criticize my own government. I'm an American citizen. I can criticize the American government, and doing so doesn't make me anti-American. But if I ask any questions about Israeli war strategy, that makes me anti-Semitic. I reject that because it's ludicrous. It's actually almost laughable. It's so ridiculous. Listen, you are totally free to criticize the Israeli government, and it does not make you anti-Semitic. I also want Israel to win the war. I also think that Israel is an important ally against radical Islamists. I also don't want the U.S. dragged into a forever war funded by me or that requires American boots on the ground. And, you know, you may be surprised that we're talking about this because we don't often talk about Israel and Hamas on the show. And one of the reasons that we don't often talk about Israel and Hamas and the conflict on the show is because of what Charlie Kirk articulated. It's basically impossible to know what is true or what is not true when the whole thing is just a fog of propaganda. Now, let me make something very clear. I can sit here no matter the propaganda and I can articulate the moral framework of Israel versus Hamas. Israel has a right to exist. Israel has a right to defend herself. Hamas is a brutal Islamist terror organization that attacked Israel, committed absolutely atrocious crimes against Israel, and Israel has every right to demolish Hamas because of it. They have a right to defend themselves. They have a right to exist. They have a right to life. And it's Hamas that embeds their terrorism in hospitals and schools and civilian populations. It's Hamas that uses children as human shields. Charlie was correct in his letter to Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel does her due diligence warning Palestinian civilians as best she can before attacks on Hamas operatives who are embedded within civilians are carried out. But when Palestinian civilians are killed, it's because Hamas uses them as human shields. And the purpose of this strategy by Hamas is not just evidence that Hamas doesn't care about humanity. That's obvious. It's also because they know it's good propaganda for them. Because nobody likes to see images of dead children, no matter who those children are. It's grotesque, it's heartbreaking, it's tragic. And Hamas thinks that they can get sympathy from the world by showing the images of the children that they held up to be attacked because Israel has to defend her people from attacks like what happened on October 7th. The moral framework here is not complicated. And I am very predisposed as an American citizen and as a Christian to take Israel's side. Because as a Catholic specifically, the Catholic religion is the fulfillment of the Jewish faith. So we not only have camaraderie in that, Christian holy sites are in Israel, and I want them preserved. And I think Christian holy sites are more likely to be preserved by the Jewish state of Israel than if radical jihadists ruled that area. I don't want Islamists to rule the world. I know Islamists, jihadists want to establish Sharia law everywhere, and Israel is a bulwark against that. Not just in the region, but in the world. I am much more predisposed to side with Israel. That doesn't mean that every single act that the Israeli government takes or their war strategy, it doesn't mean that I have to agree with that. It doesn't mean that I can't criticize that, and it doesn't mean that that makes me anti-Semitic. The day-to-day of what happens in that conflict, we don't talk about a lot, just like we don't talk about the day-to-day of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, because the day-to-day, what happens on the ground is very confusing. There's really no definitive source. There's no objective reporting. It's just a propaganda war. There's propaganda coming from both sides, and it's hard to know what to believe. For example, when we were told that there were Palestinian children that were starving, we later find out that the image that was disseminated on the mainstream media showed a child who wasn't malnourished but had some musculoskeletal problem. It was propaganda. It was a lie. It wasn't true. And let me tell you, people don't like that. You don't like that, and I don't like that. Nobody likes that. And when you are constantly subjected to propaganda and you realize that you are the victim of manipulation, you become very disillusioned. That's just human nature. That's what happens. And so what's happened in America is people have begun to lump the whole thing together because they're disillusioned. They don't know what's true. They lump the whole Israel, Hamas, Palestine thing together, and they just want to wash their hands of it. They're like, you know what? That's happening far away. We don't care. I don't want my money going to that because it looks awful and I don't know what's happening. And the other side is always better at propaganda. And what happens when you have a vacuum of disillusion, the better propaganda becomes effective. And the result of the other side's better propaganda being effective in the vacuum of disillusion, because we don't know what the truth is, because everything is in the fog of propaganda, is that young people who are subject to that propaganda end up turning against Israel. And how did Charlie Kirk describe this situation? He said it's a 5-alarm fire. He didn't want that to happen. Charlie Kirk wrote that letter to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu because Charlie wanted to try to help Netanyahu fix that problem. And while he was doing so, because he was also against another U.S. forever war, and because he also hosted a debate with someone who was against Israel, Charlie Kirk was falsely accused by the very subcontractors that he referenced in his letter to Netanyahu of being anti-Semitic, which is demonstrably false. And so I think the answer to the questions that we posed at the beginning of this episode, what was Charlie Kirk's stance on Israel, and was Charlie Kirk's stance on Israel changing, were actually answered by Charlie Kirk's words himself. Again, I don't like to wade into drama and gossip and beefing and interpersonal whatever, the infighting that just happens in the conservative movement. I don't like to do it, and I don't often do it. I have bigger fish to fry typically, and as I said at the beginning of the show, my bar is pretty high for serving as the fact checker of the conservative movement. But I just couldn't get past this idea that if I died and people with big platforms and a lot of influence were making claims that I had privately changed my views, radically changed my views, in a way that completely contradicted all available public statements and evidence. If, for example, someone said, you know, Liz Wheeler, who built her entire career on the foundation of being pro-life, had changed her mind and she was pro-abortion. Or if someone said, you know, Liz Wheeler, whose entire worldview is based on her belief in God and her Catholic faith and wanting to protect liberty so that people could pursue Christ, she was considering converting to Mormonism. If I died and people were making such claims that I privately changed my views in a way that just completely contradicted all publicly available evidence, I would expect my friends and those who knew me and you guys to set the record straight. Don't put unsubstantiated, scandalous words in the mouth of a dead man who can't defend himself. It's the most basic level of respect that we can extend to him.